Hier ist literaturlaunch.eu. Heute mit Ich sitze hier auf der Buchmesse und führe ein Interview der Autorin Claire Lombardo gegenüber. Sie hat das Buch geschrieben, Der größte Spaß, den wir je hatten. Und meine erste Frage war, auch schon allein wegen dem Cover, wie kam es zu diesem Baum des Ginkgos, der ja immer wieder kommt in diesem Buch. Wie kam es zu dieser Idee oder warum gerade der Ginkgo?
The ginkgo is kind of a repetitive element, always reappearing and also on the cover page. What's the reason behind?
Sure. So there's a ginkgo tree that plays pretty prominently in the book, and I wanted to have a character in this book who wasn't human necessarily, but was also, in a sense, a part of this family. Sort of overseeing what was going on with them for, in this case, multiple generations. And the ginkgo tree, I really just chose because it's my favorite tree and they're my favorite kind of leaves. But upon sort of further research, they have a really interesting history and a very long history. They've been around for centuries and centuries, but they're also very, someone recently told me that there was a ginkgo tree that survived Hiroshima. They were very hardy. And so I sort of liked having this formidable thing that was not, it's a living thing, but not a human, against the backdrop of this sort of crazy family.
Wie war es eigentlich, eine so intensive Liebe zu beschreiben, wie sie zwischen den Eltern geherrscht hat?
How did it feel to describe such an intense love, like it was between the parents of this family?
Yeah, I took that as kind of a challenge. So the parents, David and Marilyn, have been married for almost 40 years. They have their 40th anniversary in the book. And for me, the way I sort of framed it as I was writing the book was that I wanted to render what I was calling good love, rather than the kind of love that we often see in literature, which is fraught and terrible and everyone's falling apart. And so I think in a lot of ways it was harder to render this couple that was so loving and so not at risk of falling apart. Because it is easier to sort of default to someone misbehaves, someone wrongs someone else, someone cheats or lies or, errs in some way. And I knew that was never going to be the case disastrously for this couple. And it was kind of my way to create a stasis in sort of at the core, with these chaotic women sort of circling around them, their daughters. And so, that was kind of my goal. And then the more I sort of put the two characters together, the easier it became to sort of render this relationship because I felt like I had a handle on who they were and how they interacted.
Wieso war Wendy gerade die Person, der am meisten widerfahren ist von der ganzen Familie, also von den ganzen Kindern? Ist ja fast jedes Unglück Wendy passiert. Wie kam es dazu oder warum?
How come that out of the kids of Marilyn and Dave, why is it always Wendy who seemed to be the unlucky one, who always has, the situation, everything comes up to her and everything bad happens to her? So why is it Wendy? So a special reason behind?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think Wendy is sort of a tragic figure in a lot of ways. She's very much, yes, she is the one who nothing ever quite goes right for her. And when we start the book, the prologue starts with Wendy's wedding, when she's sort of at her peak. And I wanted to sort of show Wendy at a high point because she doesn't have too many of them. And I think Wendy was an interesting character to write because she is often making decisions that are not in her own best interest. And I think she's for most of the book trying to get a handle on herself. I think she struggles a lot with, she's a very sort of formidable person. She's very outspoken. She's very comfortable saying the things that you're not supposed to say and sort of inciting action and stirring the pot. But I think she also is struggling to kind of understand who she is and how she fits in the world. And I think the way that, Wendy makes a lot of bad choices and inflicts a lot of pain on the people that love her. And I think for me, it was kind of an exploration of, I don't think there's ever heroes or villains in fiction. I think any bad character is that way for a reason. So with Wendy, in the present arc, Wendy is the one who brings the adopted child sort of back into the fray. Wendy is making a lot of sort of reckless decisions. But when we go into her past and kind of explore what's happened to her, it sort of hopefully garners empathy in the reader, kind of makes you understand Wendy a little bit better, because she has, a lot of false starts. She tries to find happiness. She does find genuine happiness with her husband, and it doesn't work out ultimately. And so I think that was kind of an exercise for me in looking at how we become the way that we become, and the ways that sort of trauma can influence who we ultimately end up being.
Ja, am schlimmsten fand ich ja das mit der Totgeburt bei Wendy. Und sie hat ja ihr Kind verloren, sie hat ihren Mann verloren und fand ich sehr bewegend. Und wie ist es, so etwas zu beschreiben, wenn man sowas wahrscheinlich nicht selber erlebt hat?
The setting of Wendy having an abortion, getting divorced by her husband, so everything like that. So especially the situation of the abortion is really touching the soul. Isn't that hard to write about such things?
Yeah, it very much was. And I think, especially because I think at the point that I wrote a lot of those scenes, I had become so attached to these characters. And it starts to feel sort of sadistic to take these people that you've created and put them through like really terrible ordeals. And I think that was a challenge for me. And I think those were scenes that I put off writing until sort of the very end, because I knew that they were going to be difficult. And in some ways, I think that's, the fact that I felt emotionally attached to them, I hope made them feel more emotionally authentic, because I did, not to sound like a crazy person, but I do feel like these are real people. To some degree, I don't actually think they're real people, but I think it was a challenge. And I think that the attention that I'm always sort of playing with in fiction is that mix of humor and, gravitas or tragedy, the dark and the light. And there is a lot of, Wendy is the comedic relief in this novel. She's often the one who makes a bad joke at precisely the wrong moment. And so I think I wanted to contrast that with, okay, here's Wendy when she's not making a joke. Here are some situations in which she would absolutely not, say the thing that makes everyone else laugh, which was really difficult. But I think it was sort of an important emotional exercise for me too, in my understanding of these characters. And I think once I got through writing those difficult scenes, I had more empathy for the character, so was able to render her in a way that felt more authentic.
Im Gegensatz dazu gab es ja dann die Tochter Violet, die perfekte Tochter, bei der alles gelingt im ersten Augenblick. Und wie ist es mit dem Umswitchen? Also wie ist es von diesen verschiedenen Charakteren auch immer wieder das zu schreiben oder sich auch reinzudenken in diese verschiedenen Charakteren?
Yeah, on the contrary, or as contrasting point, there's Violet, the absolutely perfect daughter. And how's that to switch between those completely different characters, and switching back and forth while writing, or do you write one first? Or, no, I think that's impossible since they're interacting. So how does that? How do you feel switching between those? And
yeah, that was something that I struggled with. I think especially because I've been called a very voicey writer. Like my characters have strong voices. And I think with the four daughters, they all had very similar voices at the beginning of this novel. And Alan Gerganis, the novelist, was a teacher of mine when I was in graduate school, and he read the prologue of the novel, and he sat me down and he said, "I think we have a problem. All of these women sound exactly the same, and they all sound exactly like you." So he and I were kind of talking about how to combat that. And I think especially with Wendy and Violet, because they are so tightly wound, but they're complete opposites in a lot of ways too. I wanted them to sound very different, and their lives are very different. So one sort of technical way was Alan suggested just putting a couple of Post-it notes over my computer with each character's name and then a few adjectives just to sort of bear in mind, which was a sort of early stages technical way that I could think, okay, Violet is repressive and sort of prickly and not very friendly, and Wendy is sort of devil-may-care and crass. And then I think once I started thinking about that, I could sort of go into deeper levels, like, okay, what are turns of phrase that Wendy would say that Violet wouldn't? Or what are jokes that Wendy would think were funny that Violet wouldn't laugh at? Or what are things that Violet would notice, and how would Wendy see them differently? And so it was really just another exercise in getting to know these people. And I'm also a big overwriter, so I wrote a lot of scenes in this book that didn't make it in and wouldn't have served any purpose in the novel, but they were serving the purpose of me sort of understanding who these people are, how they talk, how they look at the world and how they interact with each other. So it was sort of a fun but fraught exercise in trying to figure out, what's similar about these two women and what's radically different, and how to render that on the page.
Und dann hat ja Violet so ganz gegenüber ihren Charakter einen Sohn geboren, und zwar den unehelichen Sohn, und zwar Jonah. Wie schnell war klar, dass gerade Violet diesen Sohn bekommt?
Yeah, kind of contradicting the perfect image one has of Violet. She has the illegitimate son. So how fast was it clear for you that, okay, that needs to be a twitch turn, that it must be Violet who has the situation?
Strangely enough, this novel actually started as a short story about Violet, which was funny because I think by late stages of writing this book, Violet was the character that I understood the least as the writer. And I remember talking to my editor, and we were close to finishing the novel, like finishing, our major edits. And she said, I don't think I have a handle on who Violet is. And I was like, me either, which was weird because that's where we started. And so I think I always knew that the short story about Violet was very much like it is in the book. I was very interested in this dynamic of this woman who has orchestrated this ostensibly picture-perfect life in the wake of something really terrible happening, which is that she had this child, she gave him up, and she wasn't sure if she wanted to, but then she sort of tamps that down for years and years and years and builds this sort of beautiful suburban landscape for herself. And then the kid comes back, and it's, the secret that she never thought would be revealed and would never resurface. So I always knew that it was her, but in writing that story, I gave her a sister, and I became kind of more interested in the dynamic between her and her sister. And I think the more that I wrote Wendy and Violet, the more that they became almost a love story in themselves. Like the David and Marilyn are very much the love story at the core of this novel, but Wendy and Violet are also sort of involved in this constant battle, but they're also, completely linked to each other and will always be, and have a lot of affection for each other, even if it doesn't always manifest itself in that way. So I liked the idea of having Violet be sort of the more passive character, and have Wendy be, as she often is, kind of the instigator in that situation.
Jonah, also der uneheliche Sohn von Violet, ist ja auch mehr oder weniger ein Katalysator in der Familie, der alles Mögliche mitbekommt, der sehr unscheinbar daherkommt und im Gegensatz zu den anderen Personen in der Familie, die sehr dominant teilweise sind, ganz anderer Typ ist. Wie ist es dann, so jemanden daneben zu stellen?
Violet's son Jonah is more the kind of the catalysator, or seems to be a catalysator in the story. He's there, but he's kind of in the background very often, and more observing, but not really being recognized for being there. How is that feeling differently in writing such a character then?
I think, Jonah was an interesting character to approach because he's the only person in this book who's not a part of this insane sort of claustrophobic family. And so he functioned in a lot of ways. He was always a character in the book, but I remember having sort of an epiphany when I was working on my thesis with one of my professors, when we both just had this moment of like, wait, Jonah is our way into this story. Jonah is going to be kind of the backbone on which we hinge the rest of, the other narrative arcs. So he is, it's a very sort of classic narrative device to have kind of the man who comes to town and shakes things up. So Jonah is, plays that role to some degree, but he's also he's first of all a way to kind of give the reader a break from the Sorensons, because they're kind of intense and often sort of annoying. I think they're just a very tightly knit, neurotic, constantly kinetic family. And Jonah is this sort of quiet, thoughtful, young man who's able to come in, throw their lives into relief a little bit, and comment on the things about them that are weird that they can't see themselves. So he's able to say, like, you guys are really rich. What's that about? Or, why is Wendy so like such a train wreck? Why are my grandparents making out in the kitchen? And so he's able to sort of ask the questions that we, the reader, might have. So he functions in that way. And he was kind of, so in that way, I felt close to him as I was writing, because it's sort of, we're both outsiders from this family, but I also wanted to take care to make him a three-dimensional character, because he is, as much a character as anyone else in the book. But yes, yeah.
Gibt's ja dann noch Lisa, die hat ja ihren depressiven Partner, oder zumindest zeitweise. Wie ist es eigentlich, so eine Beziehung zwischen Lisa und ihrem doch langjährigen Freund oder zu beschreiben?
Then the other character there is Lisa with her depressive partner. So how is it to describe such a very different relationship between Lisa and her partner?
Yeah, I think that was another difficult relationship to render, because I think I didn't want it to. The relationship between the two of them is blameless in a lot of ways. Ryan is not, to blame for his mental illness. Liza is not to blame for struggling with that. And so it was kind of always a delicate balance for me, because I didn't want it to seem like, it's Ryan's fault for being depressed, or it's Liza's fault for resenting him sometimes. And so that took a lot of overwriting too, just kind of thinking deeply about what it would feel like to, there's a scene in the book where Liza comes home and has very good news, and Ryan is pretty much catatonic, and how you sort of deal with intensely loving a person who's really, really struggling. And it was such a contrast to David and Marilyn, the parents, too, because they are sort of this open, loving, effusive pair. And Liza and Ryan love each other, and they've been together for a long time, and they care deeply for each other, but their relationship is not turning out the way that Liza wants it to. And Liza's also a psychologist, so she's sort of constantly thinking about what's different about what my mom and dad did, and how is that, what am I doing wrong, or what is Ryan doing wrong? She's always trying to sort of diagnose in the way that her father does too, as a doctor. But I kind of played with the contrast between David and Marilyn, ironclad union, and then Liza and Ryan, nobody's at fault, but everything's wrong.
Grace zum Beispiel ist ja das Nesthäkchen in dieser Familie, und sie wird eigentlich sie ist relativ erfolgreich, so sehen es erstmal ihre Eltern. Wie klar war ihnen eigentlich, dass Grace nicht unbedingt so erfolgreich ist, wie ihre Familie teilweise denkt?
So then the youngest one, Grace, so she appears to be the successful person, but in the end she's not really. So was it clear right from the beginning that she will turn out that way, or did that develop along writing?
Yeah, I think Grace was always sort of a mess. I think from early drafts of this book, and not a mess. Like I think the situation Grace is in is relatable to a lot of people, I guess, in the millennial generation, in that way that you sort of go through the motions, you do what you're supposed to do, but there's a lot of expectation. You're supposed to know exactly what you want from your life when you're 19 or 20, and I don't know anyone that's like that authentically. But Grace is sort of, going down the path, and she's the kid that her parents have never had to worry about because she always does the right thing. And then none of it works out. And I think that's a situation that, all of us find ourselves in some capacity. But I did kind of want to explore what it looked like and I've been that person. I've been the person who thinks, I should pursue this career and therefore I will, and then found myself miserable. And I think with Grace, she does what a lot of, people who like to read and talk do, which is go to law school or try to go to law school without really thinking about whether she wants to or not. It just sounds good. And she's able to pinpoint her sisters in this way of, okay, Violet was a lawyer, Liza's a, psychologist, Wendy married rich. Like they've all sort of made these ironclad decisions. And meanwhile, Grace is just sort of a floating body. And I think I'm interested in that because it's something, again, that I've gone through, that I see a lot of young people going through. I see my students going through that, where they're, they think at 21, they have to know what their career path is. And I think that's insane. And so I wanted to put Grace in a situation that I see a lot in my life.
Was teilweise ja schon angesprochen worden ist, aber wie schwierig ist es, so eine komplexe Geschichte auch rund zu bekommen, so dass es wirklich unwahrscheinlich gut lesenswert ist, also lesbar ist? Wie viel Arbeit steckt da dahinter?
It was kind of already mentioned several times, at the fringe. But how difficult is it really to get so many elements together, such a family together, so that you've got a round story and everything fits into each other? So, yeah.
It was really hard. It took a lot of drafting and a lot of anguish. I think this novel has taken the core of the novel, and the cast of characters has always been the same, but it's changed shape so many times. And it was a sort of a constant battle to balance the present arc and the past. And I tried every which way. It used to be not at all chronological. There used to not be a present arc. And I remember one draft that was literally just 600 pages of vignettes in no particular order. And I thought that was a good idea for some reason. Like it probably was like misery to read. But I think the way that I sort of mathematically approached the book when I finally felt like I had a handle on, okay, here's the present arc and here's what I need to happen in the past, is I do storyboards in my office. So I have an entire wall of my office that I just do Post-it notes, and I have a color per character and a Post-it note per scene. And so for every scene, I have to justify, what is this doing to advance the narrative, and what is it doing to advance the emotional arc of the characters? And then I lay it out, and you're sort of able to see visually, like, okay, I planted this thing on a pink Post-it back here, and so I'm going to wait to detonate that bomb 400 pages later when the reader has forgotten about it. And so they'll have that nice moment of like, I forgot about, and so it really became this mathematical game at the end, which was sort of fun. I don't have a mathematical brain at all, except for when I'm sort of storyboarding my fiction. And then it was kind of once we had sort of honed the shape of it, it was a matter of just going in and paring back certain scenes, fleshing out certain others, making sure that, again, that bomb that we planted on page 17 gets detonated on page 112 or whatever. So it was difficult, but also sort of fun. It's like solving a Rubik's Cube or something, kind of going in and making sure that everything fits together.
Was mir am Anfang sehr schwierig gefallen ist, war, dass immer wieder verschiedene Personen, die Personen immer wieder geswitcht haben. Bis ich mich erstmal daran gewöhnt habe. Wie schwierig war es, das zu schreiben? Die Person, sie switcht immer wieder zwischen den Personen hin und her. Also aus Perspektive der verschiedenen Personen. Und ich musste mich erstmal daran gewöhnen. Wie schwierig war es auch für Sie, aus dieser Perspektive, diese ständig wechselnden Perspektiven zu schreiben?
So it's constantly the switch between the perspective of out of which you're writing. So one person and the other one, be it Grace or Violet or Wendy. So how difficult is it for you really to switch those hats?
I think it got easier the more I wrote, because like I said earlier, at the beginning, I think the voices all were sort of homogenous. But then once I sort of got a feel for who these characters were, what they wanted, what they were doing in their lives, it became easier to switch back and forth between their voices. But I don't write in order. So I would sometimes have like a Liza day where I just wrote, 4 Liza scenes that I know I needed to write, or a David day, so I would kind of go about it based on my mood. And it was sort of like the character that I felt like spending time with. Because I do, sometimes there's every character in this book, I have, I would go through periods of like having a lot of affection for them, or hating them, or, being really frustrated with them and the choices they were making, that I was making them make. But I kind of just did it based on how I was feeling, who I was feeling empathy for at that time. And I tried to always write from a place of empathy. That's something I try and be very mindful of when I'm writing. I never want to write, if I was ever feeling like, Wendy could be sort of cartoonish sometimes in earlier drafts, in the way that she was kind of this pot stir, instigator, comic relief. And then I would have to go back and say, no, like, this is a character who has suffered a lot, and let's, come at this from a place of understanding and emotional generosity. So I based it on sort of my own feelings towards the characters.
Also ging es ihm beim Schreiben so wie mir. Wunderbar. Also wie beim Lesen. Also,
So you did feel some love and reading, sometimes feeling both the characters.
Gibt es weitere Planungen? Gibt es wieder eine Familiengeschichte, oder wird es irgendein anderes Genre geben, was Sie bedienen?
What are your plans for the future? Will there be another family story, or maybe rather completely different genre?
Sure. So I'm working on 2 projects right now. One is I'm writing a second novel, which is another family story, but it's, I would say, tonally quite different than this one. And I think it's not about an idyllic marriage, I guess is sort of what I mean. There is a marriage at the core of it, but I think I'm sort of working through sort of the darker nuances of relationships. in a way that I'm sort of doing with each of the daughters in this book, but it's a chance to really go deep. It's about a single couple, and I follow them for the entire novel, which is sort of fun. It's kind of nice after writing this sort of big chaotic family story with 7 narrators and a lot of time. It's nice to kind of limit yourself to a smaller cast of characters. And I am also writing so this book is being made into a television series. So I am writing the pilot episode right now, which has been really fun because it was sad to say goodbye to these characters who I'd spent, 5+ years working on this book, and it was sort of sad to leave them. So it's nice to kind of revisit it and think about, the structure of a television series versus a, 700-page, however long it is, novel. So it's been fun to spend time with the characters again, though, and think about what their stories might look like beyond where we leave them in the book.
Sehr interessant. Das mit der Serie hatte mir schon jemand vom Verlag erzählt.
Yes, we just got the news last night. Just got confirmed last night, so everyone's very excited.
Oh yes. Was für ein Gefühl ist es für Sie, auf der Buchmesse hier in Frankfurt zu sein?
So, how do you feel being here in Frankfurt at the book fair? Or have you visited maybe the book fair earlier already? No.
Yeah. No, it's incredible. No, I have never been to anything like this, and it's honestly still really strange for me that my book exists that it exists at all, but that it exists in other countries. So it's been really wonderful to talk to people in a completely different place about it. And I was talking to someone earlier, just sort of about even cultural differences, like the ways that families exist in one sphere. Oh, okay. Our conception of family in one culture versus another. So it's been really wonderful to see these characters kind of taking on life beyond the Midwestern suburbs of the U.S. So it's really fun. It's kind of overwhelming, but in a good way.
Ja, danke für das Gespräch und Ihnen noch eine schöne Messe.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's great to meet you.
Das war's für heute. Bis bald bei der Literatur-EU. Euer Markus.